No, no buzz. Just Bees Book Club. Today we're talking Tides of Lust by Samuel R Delany. Also called Equinox, I believe, is the preferred title. That got reprinted in like '94. This is a 1973 novel by master of science fiction, one of the best writers alive, obviously. Um, Chip Delaney, as I have heard, he's referred to by friends. This is his first porn book. Um, this specific edition I have is the Savoy Books. So I believe that's I don't know how you pronounce that. The Savoy Books edition that I think had a fairly small printing in the UK in 1980 and led to not only like multiple thousands of copies of it being seized by police, but also somebody going to jail for it, for publishing it. Because this is a fucked up book. It's yeah, it's Delaney's first porn novel. Obviously, if you don't know Delaney, you you're fucking missing out. Stars in My Pocket, like grains of sand, is one of my favorite books of all time. You can hear me discovering it on a podcast that no longer exists called Spectology. Um, Dahlgren is great. Babel 17 is great. I haven't finished Dahlgren actually, and that's a useful thing. I so like a year ago ish, more than that, I guess at this point. I started reading Dahlgren and was really interested in it, and had to stop reading it because the copy I had literally fell apart in my hands. Um, this is the material. This is the real materiality of reading books. The like, oh, I just love how books smell thing is, I'm sure, real to people, but is so overblown. Um, Part of the materiality of reading books is sometimes you start reading one and it just falls apart in your hands, and you're like, fuck, a bunch of pages went missing, and I can no longer continue reading this. Um, which is good. That's a good thing. Because at some point I will now go ahead and read Dahlgren in the future and have the knowledge that I had from reading it recently, and by in the future I mean maybe 10 years from now, but I will have that built-in understanding of what what is so great about that book, and then I will still have surprises to come to me. But yeah, this was written, I think I briefly read um, sort of in the same time frame as Dahlgren. I've never read Tales from Neverion. I've never read most of his big works, I guess is what I'm saying, or any of his smaller works aside from this one, um, with the exception of the one I've done on this channel, Times Square Red, Times Square Blue, which is another thing that I read this year that, or not another thing in the sense of this being one of them, but one of the most impactful things I've read since I started this channel. I don't know that Tides of Lust quite gets there. Um, it's real fucked. This is a book that like explicitly has people having sex, has adults having sex with minors, that has a very long aside about like the chief, I guess, antagonist of this novel um, stopping by to do some necrophilia with some folks. And none of these are like alluded to. This is all very explicitly described in the text. There is a I mean, there are a lot of rape scenes in this, but there's also just a very explicit, really brutal rape scene in this. There is too many things to even try to recount, of, 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 of fucked up stuff that you should not read if you do not want to, or um, even if you do, maybe. Um, but yeah, I guess uh, my so the last thing I did was um, I was listening to Shot. I don't know what the order is of this channel or whatever. Is that I talked about Hotel Iris by Yoko Ogawa, um, which is a book I thought was very, very good and really fucked up. And I think at one point in that I explicitly mentioned, like, I haven't read anything for a while now that just wildly refuses. No, that's not how I said it. That just is. I mean, that book is that's the best way to say it. That book is explicitly a book about a 17-year-old girl who engages in a sadomasochistic relationship with an old man, and it's from her perspective, and I think it is done very well. And there are also just things in there that are really interesting in terms of how she is characterized in the context of that. Um, Tides of Lust, way way more explicitly like Sadian, and I haven't read the Marquis de Sade since I was probably like 15 or 16, so 20 years ago, basically. Um, and that I found was an interesting way to approach this book. Again, it's been like 20 years and I barely remember this thing that I read today. I don't barely remember it, but like I couldn't pull super specific prose out of it. Um, which is to say, I've got no prose examples of Desaad. I don't remember what he writes like necessarily. But goddamn, if this is not written in a really interesting way. The core. Look, okay, so the core of this book is uh, a captain of a ship called the Scorpion um, opens this book by having sex with like a 13 and 16-year-old repeatedly until he comes 6 times. Um, he then gets off the ship because he saw somebody looking at him and then finds a wallet. They go into this town that they are docked in. And the time frame I think for this is like the late 1900s. This is like the late 20th century. I think there's an explicit uh, reference to like we are not, it's not we are close to the turn of the century, but like the 20th century is almost over. So this is like maybe contemporaneous with when he wrote it in like 73 or maybe like a little later. And I've seen people talk about, or I've seen articles about this book that say that this is like not a science fiction book from Delany, but it does have elements of the fantastic. I think that's kind of bullshit. Not because it's not that there might be a novum here, but because the elements of the fantastic I think people are identifying is just his persistent reference to Faust, um, both the Marlowe and the shit. Uh, anyway, every chapter opens with a different sort of epigraph about the Faust myth or some sort of Faustian thing. Um, Goethe, I that was when I snapped, I was trying to remember Goethe's name. Um, those are brought up very early, the Marlowe and the Goethe. Um, it's a hard book to talk about. Okay. Um, so it opens with this elaborate sex scene, and then it goes on to sort of like integrate with this like community that are all people who, and this is the novum I was talking about, the Darko Suvin sort of novum of the thing that changes things. It's been too long since I read Darko Suvin that I don't know that I'm doing him justice at all here. Um, but the implication I got through the first like 2/3 of this book is that I the fundamental change in this world, as opposed to the world that we live in, is that everyone is openly available to everyone else sexually at all times. And the book does then challenge that perception. Um, and that's not like a perception I'm excited about. Again, because, you know, there's kids in this. Uh, but there's a sense that that is sort of the operating logic of the book until you get to the very explicit rape scene, um, performed by two brothers who are. This is a real fucked up book, by the way. Uh, Turn it off, please. Uh, Performed by two brothers who, like, one of them explicitly like wants to suck the cum out of uh, the rape victim's pussy. Um, and also they fuck constantly, and they are explicitly biological siblings. Like there's so much incest in this. There's so much really nasty things. Um, what I want to talk about is the reasons that I ended up reading through this whole thing today. Um, Number one, obviously, is I really appreciate Samuel Delany's writing. I think is a very lauded writer that does not get nearly enough attention for the kinds of writing he has done, um, and also just like the specific way he engages with language. Um, this is a book that has so many like ellipses, and I don't mean that like that there are actual ellipses in this book because ew, but like the descriptions of sex so often are like very short sentences that imply so much, um especially the beginning, and then like throughout the book, as more characters are introduced, including a man just named Nazi. um uh, the book like jumps into people's heads in a way because it's all written from like a very close third person point of view. um and so it will, you know, for just like a page or 4 pages, like jump directly into somebody's internal monologue, and each of them are written so particularly differently that I even just like sort of reading it all in one all in one go, I was like, oh shit, that's wait a second, there are like there are compound fucking sentences here. There's this character who is significantly less literate, like does much more run-on sentences. That's not, you know, judgment call. It's just the amount of craft at the sentence level of this book, of things that I deeply do not want to read, is so impressive and beautiful. Um, and then you add to that the way that so the sort of focal character is the captain of the Scorpion, who is the one who has the six orgasms early, and has is sort of like built up as somebody who's, if he has his seventh orgasm, he's proving he's the devil and he's going to like change the world, um, which is also deeply wrapped up in the Faust stuff and deeply weird. Um, his captain's log is like a pivotal point in the novel. I think it's, you know, it's maybe like a third of the way through ish, where you first read his captain's log, and it's real fucked. Um, there's like a point in it, in this like sort of small chapter, where he talks about how he's like murdered three people, and there's a cat in my room. Hello. Um, that's really complicated. Um, I like cats a lot. I genuinely do. Um, there's a captain's log at the sort of third point of this book where um, the captain, this sort of central character, talks about murdering people, and then the book explicitly has these sort of parentheticals, and both it's both parentheticals and like very brief authorial asides, that are really hard to, or at least on a first read, hard to navigate which one is like which at some points, because there are things that could just be like from the perspective of characters, and there are things that could be just from the authorial perspective. Anyway, this captain's log, it describes from the first person perspective, because there are these moments throughout the tides of lust, that explicitly point to this as a book that is being written. Um, Including, there are characters who talk about certain things in the book. I think it's the proctor, sort of midway through the book, is telling a long story that involves the necrophilia, actually, um, where he like explicitly tells the captain, like, hey, I can tell you this next part, but I have to whisper it because this doesn't belong in this book. And there are like small asides that are saying like things like black people aren't allowed to smile in this book. Um, they can grin, they can smirk, they can tilt their head snidely, and a bunch of other things. But like, there's a there's a very clear, not very clear. There's a very uh, nasty, particular way in which uh, this book is written self-reflexively, while also being like absolutely brutal. Um, but to go back to the thing I was saying earlier, I think the major way in which this is like not a sort of Desaad style thing is that, at least for the most part, everyone who is being very depraved in this uh, is, if you get to the point where you can believe that anyone can consent to anything at all times, and so everyone consents to everything at all times. And again, there are explicit like examples of like a father raping his children. So uh, it's not good. But I think there's the animating argument might be everyone can consent and they do, and so this sort of like orgiastic fuck fest that happens over the course of like 12 hours in the narrative could work. I'm I'm posing this as a question, I think, because it's rough. It's fucking rough. But the craft is really good, and specifically the way the I mean, so yeah, again, like early stuff is written all in like very short elliptical sentences. Um, there's such good use of there's like a handful of lines of a really really gross scene that is just like a four times repetition of his face is period, and then a mostly unrelated sentence, and the phrase, and then an unrelated sentence, um, and largely it is shot through with the Faust stuff. There are two sort of like major um, monologues, I guess, both by the proctor, and who's like an artist who is obsessed. He's the one who decides that if the captain has 7 orgasms in 12 hours, he's actually the devil, and a whole new world is happening. He's also an artist. He's a painter. He wrote a novel about all his sexual escapades. He's the one who talks about the necrophilia. The sort of major antagonist, the protagonist of this book is a woman named, I think, Catherine, who is involved in that necrophilia scene. And there's a major monologue by the proctor that sort of says like, let's go do terrible things to her because we can tell by the way this story has not actually, or has repeatedly referred to her without actually telling anything about her, that she is sort of the central character here. She is the force of this novel, um, and and so we must rally our troops to do terrible things, and then he distributes a bunch of drugs, and another sort of side character says a bunch of shit. And then there's her sort of monologue that happens like 30 pages later, that is basically her saying like, Y'all ain't shit. Um, I am waiting for the truth of lust to come at me, and you don't have it. Um, which is a wild oversimplification of both of those monologues that I do think are things that are not going to stick with me, frankly, because I'm having trouble even thinking about this book at this point. This whole book is going to stick with me. Not the thrust of it, not the thrust is a word that is used a lot. Um, the hunch of it to to use. They talk about hunching and thrusting a lot. Delaney has a very very specific way of describing m- motions of the human body that isn't like he just does the same thing over and over. It's like every time he says it a little bit different, and it's compelling as a piece of writing. Um, but yeah, I like I said, I didn't finish Dahlgren, but like it makes a bunch of sense that he was writing both of them at the same time. Just thinking about the opening scene of Dahlgren. I don't remember the opening scene, but like uh, the the early sex scenes in Dahlgren, maybe in the first like 100 pages or so, are deeply similar to how this one works. But it's fucked. Okay, I have no thoughts here. Just the most thoughts. Uh, you shouldn't read this book. B. It's also really interesting. Thanks for not watching.